Welcome, everybody, to this episode of The Archive. I am very happy to introduce you to, let's see if I can get the name right, Marquise Cadhart Hearts Anna Main. Did I say that correctly? How off was I?
Marquis Cadhart Hearts Anaman.
Anaman. Okay, cool. Awesome. One of the longer titles that we've had of any of our guests so far. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Not too bad. Busy weekend, but I'm glad to be here. Glad to have you on. We're going to have some fun this evening. So the first thing I want to start with, kind of the easy softball question. How did you get into LARP? And was there anything like remotely LARP related that you were into beforehand? Where like if you're looking back on it, it's like, ooh, that gave me a leg up when I got into this game.
So the answer to that is mostly no. I remember me and my friends, we were very weird in elementary school. While everybody else was playing kickball, we were walking around and doing what essentially amounted, before we even knew what it was, like a tabletop game, kind of, without character sheets, where we were basically taking turns who was the DM and the players, and we were telling a story. Sometimes we would be reliving a game that we played, because we were the nerds who played, like, Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest and stuff like that. Well, it was called Dragon Warrior at the time. And one thing that we did when we went over to someone's houses is we'd sword fight with plastic baseball bats, like the hollow ones and we wouldn't hit each other very hard, but sometimes it didn't feel very good on the knuckles, even if you're not swinging it hard. So I guess that was like my first LARP, maybe, kind of like, it's pretty much the equivalent of like, when did you get into board gaming? And it's like, oh, I used to make board games on poster board, when I was 5. Like, it's not really board game creation, but
Yeah, it's where everybody's first board game was Risk or Monopoly.
Yeah, exactly.
So was there any D&D or RPG type of games in your background before LARPing?
Yeah, I did play a little bit of D&D and tabletop at in Valparaiso, Indiana, which is my hometown. There's this place called Galactic Greg's, and it had a few regulars there that I recognized when I first came to Amtgard. It's like, oh, it's you guys. But how I first got into Amtgard was Robert Elliott, aka Sir Kane. I didn't actually know him very, very well in high school, but I did go to high school. He was like a year behind me, I believe. And he was friends with Andy Cusin, aka Paco, the Kung Fu Penguin. And he told Andy that he invited Andy out to try this LARP. And at some point I asked Andy something like, hey, do you want to come over this weekend and play video games or something? Because that's what we used to do. We used to play N64 and stuff like that, And he's like, nah, I'm going to try this one thing called Amtgard. It's like this LARP. I'm like, what's a LARP? And it's like, oh, live action role-playing game. Oh, it's something I've been looking for my entire life. And I looked at the rule book and I'm like, I'm inviting myself to come with. In fact, I'll be your ride, And
what version of the game was that?
Version 6.
6, okay.
6.0. This was 1999, the early part of 1999. So it was my senior year in high school. I was class in 1999.
Okay.
And so there's an ongoing joke argument between me and Paco on who actually started first, who was the first to get out of the car. Now, Paco will tell you it was him, but of course he's a filthy liar, and he should be banned for lying. It was me who got out of the car,
Of course.
Of course, yes. So
tell me your first day. You walk out. Most players are overwhelmed a bit, curious a bit. There's always that experienced fighter who kind of puts you in your place. How'd your first park day go?
So thankfully, we didn't really have anyone who was experienced in Amtgard when we first started for the first few months. We actually got visited by people from Griffin's Perch who whipped all our asses because they were all 6th level, and wow, they have Sphere of Annihilation, which was terrible back then, by the way. It's a decent spell now, but back then it was terrible. And wow, they couldn't, and they cast Doomsday on us, which was a spell that you have to say Doomsday 1, Doomsday 2, Doomsday 3 until you get to Doomsday 350. And wow, that's a powerful spell that, it's a high level spell that they killed us all with. And
for those who didn't play back in the previous versions, if you actually got Doomsday off, it killed everybody on the field.
Yes, it did. Yes.
It was just a nuke. It killed everybody.
There are lots of mass spells like Doomsday, and Wind was another one. Wind, there are very few people who knew what the Wind spell was because it was like a really long poem. So most wizards didn't think it was good. It was awesome. It was a great spell. All it did was make it so everybody, allies and enemies alike. No, it wasn't allies. It was all enemies. Went back to base. So if you're playing an objective-based game, like where your job is to hold something, it was amazing. Especially if the game in question, they didn't ban mass spells, which they often did for that very reason. But yeah, when I first started in Amtgard, they didn't have cloth covers on weapons yet. That was something that people started picking up. All weapons were just duct tape. It was covered in duct tape, and they were much heavier. So it was PVC, couch cushion foam. Sometimes we were starting to get into Fun Noodle and stuff like that, and Monster Noodle and stuff like that. And you would just wrap it in duct tape, and there you're good to go. So it was heavy. That was my first weapon. It was a bamboo long sword. That was two-handed long sword. That was the first weapon I owned, and it was covered in duct tape all the way up.
I love it. So, first class that you ever played?
Assassin. When I was in tabletop games and playing computer RPGs, I was on a rogue kick at the time, where I was always playing rogue, and rogue was my favorite class. So assassin was the equivalent of that in Amtgard. And I wondered why there wasn't a rogue class, and it was okay, well, that makes sense. Amtgard is more of a war game, and it's not I'm not disabling traps or picking locks. I'm 100% combat. And what's a rogue that's 100% focused on combat? Well, it's an assassin. So
yeah, for sure. So that you said it was Port of Winter's became Port of Winter's Night, it was Crusaders Cove, right, at the time?
Yes, it was Crusaders Cove because it was in a park that was outside of VU, Valparaiso University, for people.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And their I believe their sports ball team was called the Crusaders. I think it was football. I'm not sure. I don't pay attention to that stuff. But so it was Crusaders Cove. We ended up moving from VU because we actually got kicked off by security because Columbine happened around that was 2001. So then we moved to Forest Park, and we didn't change our name to Port of Winter's Night then. What actually happened was a few years down the road, between people moving the sheriff position and moving all that, people moving away, no one could find where our contract was. So we lost our contract. We had to sign a new one with the Burning Lands and the Rising Winds. And that gave us the opportunity to change our name. So we became the Port of Winter's Night.
Gotcha. So tell me about, I'm always interested because I started in 2010, 2011. And so the Rising Winds was already firmly established by that point. So tell me about the early days, about before you guys were a kingdom, after you resigned and were a part. What was the early kingdom like in those days?
The early kingdom was very much, it was like a principality is today, but the principalities didn't exist. So instead, we were a bunch of parks that called ourselves the Rising Winds. And we were the Barony of the Rising Winds, and then we were the Duchy of the Rising Winds. And it was kind of weird because there originally was a park that was before my time called the Rising Winds, I believe.
And Lion's Tomb, right? Weren't there two of them?
Well, I think the park that was called the Rising Winds eventually became the Park of Lion's Tomb. When they decided to name the entire area the Rising Winds, the Valley of the Rising Winds, then they renamed the park the Rising Winds to the Park of Lion's Tomb. And so that was the two things, is the Lions, there was the Rising Winds and Windsmore Crossing. The legend says, and I wasn't part of this, that they were independently started up Amtgard parks.
And they were in two different kingdoms, right?
I believe they were just both freeholds, but again, I'm not sure. Like this is where my knowledge is fuzzy, just because I wasn't part of it. So it's me. I guess it's just me recounting a legend. But legend has it that Windsmore Crossing was full of older folk, who had been playing kind of by themselves. And the Rising Winds was started by Hobbit and his friends. And Hobbit came from Texas Amtgard, so he already had a load of experience. And at one point they met, and there was kind of a rivalry between the older and newer players. Not much has changed in the Rising Winds, and the rivalry was heated at some points, but eventually they came together. And they decided, are we going to be, a big group called the Rising Winds or Windsmore Crossing? And they ended up having a ballot game to decide that, and the Rising Winds won. The younger players actually won. And looking back, I'm like, how did that happen? Because usually, it's the older players who are better at fighting. But looking back, I'm like, okay, the Rising Winds was actually started by Hobbit, who had experience in, the Texas stuff. So it would be like, if there was a freehold of people who were playing for 5 years, picture someone who's experienced in fighting and training, like a Navrin starting his own park. He could probably get that park up to speed in about a year to beat that freehold.
I had never heard that story of that's how the name was chosen. That's pretty interesting. I had, out of all the lore and stories, I didn't know that. And you said the Winmorian Crossing, and
Windsmore Crossing, yeah.
I went to the Winmorian Guard. I've heard that name a whole lot. That's
where that came from. The thing is, I actually know a lot of the people who helped found the Rising Winds, like Hobbit, but a couple other ones are Tark and Kalik, which might sound familiar to you. Tark was the one who wrote the Rising Winds song. He was like the big bard of the Rising Winds. But those three are like some of the 6 founders. I believe there's 6 founders of the Rising Winds. I'm not sure who the other 3 are, but the stories I've heard from them are, number one, the reason why the colors were maroon and gray are because those are the 2 fabrics that happened to be on sale at Walmart when they were going to Walmart to pick up fabric. Number 2, the Rising Winds, the meaning of it does not come from tornadoes in the Midwest. It was a fart joke.
Sounds fitting for what would become the largest kingdom. Yep, I get it. So where did your park? How did your park play into all of that early, the duchy or into kingdom stuff?
So it was kind of funny because per capita for our park, it was a shire in Northwest Indiana. If you look at the history of monarchs from 2000 to 2012, 2015, a lot of them came from Phone. There's a large percentage for such a small park. So it was definitely a park full of people who were very heavily invested in the game, even though it was small in number. I guess we just kind of sucked at recruiting, or maybe all of our leadership was focusing on kingdom stuff, because it never broke out of the barony. It got close to barony and duchy levels a couple times, but never quite hit that. But it was definitely for when it was the Port of Winter's Night. It was definitely a stick jock park. Like a lot of the kingdom's best fighters were at that park. So we ditched a lot and ditched some more and all that stuff.
For those who aren't aware of some of the names who kind of came out of that park, there's Kaads here. Let's see, what Jinx and Hades were from there, correct?
Just Jinx. Hades was not. Hades came from down south, yeah.
Who else was in Kingdom Office from that area? Was Varus from there?
Varus was from there. Right. Cain originally hailed from there.
Okay.
Although he moved down, and he was a member of Griffin's Perch for a lot longer than he was part of Winter's Night, but he started there.
And Cain was the first monarch of the kingdom, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Awesome.
Gregor was one of the first officers of the park, like one of the first dukes. And when we were a duchy, we had a duke who basically acted like the king, stuff like that. and it was just like we had PMs. Craven, who was the PM who got us on the Orc, was from Pwn. So yeah, a ton of leaders, a ton of really great leaders.
And it's a park that's still going strong today. They just I saw last week they reopened for the first time, or yesterday they reopened for the first time in all this COVID stuff, and had 8 or 10 people out there. So a long-lived park in a game that doesn't happen that often. We're talking a 25-year-old park, give or take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it had its resurrection a few years ago, where like Paco and Xander really came together and did a heavy recruitment push. So yeah, it's come a long way, and it's gotten beaten up over the years, and it's shrunken. It's nearly died. It's moved locations quite a few times before it finally ended up back in Valpo.
So something I always ask all of my guests who have been around as long as you have. So again, I came in 2010, 2011, and I have, depending on who I'm talking to, I hear stories about how great old Amtgard was, or I hear horror stories about how terrible it was. So which one, in your opinion, was it? What was good? What was bad? Are all the stories that I have heard about how great or how terrible, are those true? Give me your take on old Amtgard.
So old Amtgard was a little bit of both. It had its great moments and it had its terrible moments. Like when the terrible moments were definitely moments to learn from. You see, with a few exceptions, there were some good people but there were a good handful of people who were running the Rising Winds, who were, we'll call them, they're people my age, but they didn't act my age. They about 95%, well, 99% of Amtgard were, 17-year-olds and 20-year-olds. And then, so they were kind of trying to relive their, youth, or, they're basically 40-year-old man children. And the bad thing that I'll say is that there was a lot of underage drinking. Like a lot of Amtgarders, and I believe the Rising Winds hosted Olympiad in 2002. And there was just everyone from outside of the Rising Winds who visited us noted at the level of underage drinking. And there was blatant drug use. Those are all actually something that I kind of fought hard to stop when I started actually getting into politics, which didn't happen until 2007. So I was in Amtgard a good almost 10 years before I actually started taking it seriously. Until then, I was actually kind of one of the Boy Scouts who didn't drink, and didn't go to events to get hammered. But I remember there was someone who was getting into politics at a much earlier age who I rode down with, and he was 17, 18 or something like that. And there's a couple people who are trying to crack down on underage drinking. So they finally implemented the wristband thing. And my 18-year-old friend got an over 21 wristband 5 minutes after he arrived. So it was a try but failed attempt to take it. But eventually that we got rid of the really terrible adults and replaced them with actual adults. Eventually a lot of the people who were kids at that time grew up and were that we were really surprised that we didn't get sued.
Well, and talk about, I know you were on the Amtgard leadership panel that talked about this, if I recall, about the Rising Winds getting asked to never come back to the state parks because this was because of the underage drinking thing, right?
Oh yeah. I remember a story where there's this guy named Balvog who was an underage drinker from Ashen Hills, and Balvog was a hilarious guy. He came out of his tent drunk while the DNR was, patrolling, and they said, "Hey, breathe in this," and he breathed in the breathalyzer, and then he goes, "Wow, that's a pretty big number." So that sort of this blatant stuff. I believe that was Shaq Morak that we got kicked out of. There's people who were, smoking marijuana at that event that walked right into the DNR while, reeking of it. So it was pretty bad. it was pretty blatant. And like I said, I'm surprised that there wasn't some huge bust that happened where a lot of, the prominent people got arrested, that sort of thing for hosting underage drinking party outdoors.
So that's the bad. Those are the stories that I've heard. So you have confirmed that the bad is as bad as I have heard.
Yes.
Is the good as good as I have heard?
The good is Amtgard is and always has been just a really fun game to play. I've always liked Amtgard. I've always liked the class battles. I've like it. There's always been the camaraderie of it's not so much the as it is now, and I'll get into that in the next video. But back in the from 2000 to 2016 Rising Winds, there was camaraderie. It was nowadays, I think if you and this might change when COVID
who knows where everything is going to land with COVID at this point. I feel like we're going to have major cultural shifts and differences coming back out of COVID.
Yeah. I can touch on that too. I've seen some parks just bounce back from COVID, and people who quit Amtgard a long time ago based on personal grudges show back up, because they it's kind of the thing where, if they're like, I'm never playing Amtgard again. And then society tells them you can't play Amtgard right now. And they're like, what? But I want to play Amtgard now. Now that you told me I can't, I want to, so. But back in the day in the Rising Winds, and the camaraderie was real. You could be part of a fighting company like the Windmorian Guard or Vargr, and you would be a member of that fighting company second, and a member of the Rising Winds first. And it was just everyone constantly wandered around the campground, said hey to each other. You could go there was constant, everyone was pretty much welcome in every camp. That was the thing. And there was constant, talk, socialization to be had. I think, and I'm not trying to sound like a bitter old fogey, but nowadays I think if you show up to the Rising Winds, most of the companies are staying within their cabins, and you can go out and then no one's really out and about, they're all just kind of hanging out in their individual units. Now I think if you're a member of a fighting company, or if you're a member of this clique, you're a member of that clique first and a member of the Rising Winds second. So that's one thing that was good about the Rising Winds that I really miss.
So you mentioned a fighting company there that I have heard the name of, but there's no wiki info, and I haven't found anyone who can tell me more. So tell me more about Vargr. That's one I have heard, but I haven't met any members or anyone who can really tell me anything about them.
I'm still technically a member of Vargr, so you got the right person. I still have my belt somewhere around here. Vargr apparently, and I don't know how, I know a little bit about how Vargr started outside of the Rising Winds. It used to be kind of a Texas thing that came up to the Rising Winds. And it was kind of a split off of the Saracens. The colors of Vargr were black, red, and blue. So it split off of the Saracens. From what I've heard, it wasn't a happy split off of the Saracens. But by the time Vargr came up to the Rising Winds, it was completely separate from the Saracens. The Saracens and Vargr didn't interact or anything like that on a negative or positive matter. But Vargr was one of the first big leadership companies of the Rising Winds. It was kind of like the company of the younger folks who took over. It was kind of I don't know if you remember when Vanguard, took over all the offices, and they were a heavily political company who kind of ran the kingdom. It was very much like that. Only there was no old guard competing with them. So they kind of had their run of the kingdom for a while. They were, the company. They also had all the best players in Vargr, So
were there any names in there that I would recognize?
See, Hobbit would be a big one. He was the one looked on. Kevin Brown, aka Shadow, and there's a billion different shadows, but he's considered one of the first stick jocks of the Rising Winds. but other than that, those are the only two big names. Kalan was part of it. She was the regent of the Rising Winds for a while. So, and they did have a Vargocracy for a while, where all of them were in office at the ducal level. Once we became by the time we became a kingdom, Vargr had already split off, and I don't know if you remember the Luminari. That's the one that like Doc. Luminari split directly off of Vargr, and they became the new big shots. That was kind of like a even though it was kind of a disagreement between the old guard and the new that caused the Luminari to split off within Vargr. And it was basically kind of a thing where all the active Vargr members and the recruits that just joined up who are heavily getting into leadership, they all split off and left the old guard behind. And that's about when I joined Vargr. It was kind of a dying company when I joined them, but I was friends with all of them and stuff like that. But it wasn't really a competitive company. The first competitive company that I joined, and this is a good segue, is Dark Harvest, which
was Kane, you, Anavrin,
pretty much everyone who's in Errant Dawn right now. like I was in FC with you for a while. That we were the Dark Harvest faction.
And Dark Harvest, for those who aren't real familiar with him, it was a relatively short-lived company, but while they were there, they won a lot. Bridge Wars is our competitive event, and if you look at, like, I've made a chart over who won every Bridge Wars just because I was interested, and it's like FC, 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 and then Dark Harvest, and then it goes back to FC for a while. Like, they were in that span of history, they were a short-lived but very strong on the field company.
Yeah, and it was a very glorious time. I still have the symbol was black background with an orange sickle. It was meant to be similar to the Copper Hook, which was a company in Harn, which is a tabletop game that Kane and Anavrin are very, very fond of. It was very much Dark Harvest. It was very much, built from the ground up to be competitive. We were the ones who made the alliance with the Middlemarch Dag people, that sort of a thing. Which
is still going. Yeah.
Which is still going. And we kind of added them to our numbers and taught them Amtgard. And they were pretty easy to teach Amtgard. Like, one of them, Brune, was a really good pitcher, I believe, in college. You have the...
Yep. So let me see if I can zoom in here, just because can I zoom in? Oh. Mm-hmm. So for those, these are the companies. A little bit ago, I was super interested in how long these companies had been around, because I think that the longevity of companies is something so I made this little chart, and then I've got the Bridge Wars winners. So the first Bridge Wars that I could find was Sol Invictus in 2005. Justicars 2006, 2007, Dark Harvest 2008, 2009, FC in 2010, 2011, Saracens in 2012. If you remember, that was the first one I remember where they gave points for gate.
I remember that one.
FC won the bridge battle. I'll just say, I'll leave that one there. And then FC 2013, 14, 15. Exalted in 2016, FC in 2017, Exalted Order in 2018, and then Errant Dawn in 19, and we didn't have it in 2020.
Yeah. And man, so I'll make a arrogant joke now. I probably won't be at Bridge Wars at 2021, so you guys have a chance.
I'm actually super interested to see I've had this conversation quite a bit with some of my friends, is to see where the company landscape falls coming out of COVID, because I think a lot of the quote established powerhouse companies have the opportunity to fall and miss a step coming out of this. So I really could see someone like a Coup Morgan or a Daggers or one of the typical smaller companies coming in and developing a foothold where some of the other companies might be able to, and I love that. Like people sometimes think it's like OFC is the, the powerhouse and we want all the power, which we want to win, but it's no fun if you don't have any competition. And so I love Errant Dawn. I love that that's competitive. I love if there's this shakeup that makes the game more fun for everybody.
Absolutely.
I'm excited for it, man.
Me too. And like a lot of people in these companies, they've gotten, they've fallen and gotten out of shape during COVID. I've heard two phrases. I've heard the quarantine 15, which is the 15 pounds you gained over quarantine. And I've heard more like the quarantine 50, which, I've seen people who've gained a lot of weight during COVID.
Yep.
And by the way, this is a bragging thing. I'm the opposite. I've lost 65 pounds during COVID.
Congratulations.
I'm in a lot better shape, but I need entirely new garb now.
I'm super interested to see who comes in and sneaks some early tournament wins.
Definitely.
That will count to Warlord, because I think everyone. I think 90% of the game is going to come in rusty, and those guys who have pushed hard through COVID can come back in and have a chance to where they normally wouldn't get these tournament wins, but are going to get some rusty Warlords, which I'm super excited for that. That doesn't bother me at all.
Win is a win, in my opinion. Yeah, if someone comes in and beats a bunch of people who they normally wouldn't because they're rusty, those people should. If those people didn't want them to win, those people shouldn't have been rusty. I'm a huge advocate of like that competitive edge and stuff like that. So, yeah. 100%.
Yeah, I agree. I'm excited to see where A, the companies land, and then B, where the competitive tournaments land coming out of COVID. It's gonna be pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah. Oh, going back to I thought of another answer of like how good did Amtgard used to be. Now, this is kind of coming from like the V8 versus V7 perspective. I want to say that V8 is a vastly superior game than V7 was, in my personal opinion. And I think
much more balanced, at least.
Much more balanced, much more streamlined, much more easy to get into. Like I saw a lot of parks there were very few people who actually got V7. And there's a lot of parks that turned into battle game parks from ditch parks because of V8. So I think V8 is a vastly superior game especially when it comes to bringing players in. Now, what I will say is V7 was superior to V8 in certain very specific ways, and that is games that the longer term, like day-long games like Noblander, where you had a fear of death. V8 does not do well to establish that fear of death. So people know, back in V7, every class had a set amount of lives. And like Warrior, one of its big things was it had more lives than any other class. Most classes had 4 lives. Barbarian or Warrior and Barbarian end up getting 6, so they were like, yeah. And in a normal game, that actually didn't matter because, in any given scenario, if a team gets wiped, then if you wipe that team 4 times, the only ones left is the Warriors and Barbarians. So that life advantage doesn't really, enter into it. And that's actually what True Grit's kind of supposed to present, is that, that extra life kind of coming back. So now it's part of the rule set. But there used to be an event called Noblander, and Noblander was, so you started out on Friday, you got there and it ran 24 hours, it ran from Friday night to Saturday night. And then there was Court and Feast, and it ran into the night. And you arrived there, you signed in, you got your weapons and everything like that. You registered your spell list, and your life count. Suppose your class had 4 lives. Those were your lives the weekend. Once you were shattered, you were done. And back then, like. Resurrect, there was no greater Resurrect, and Resurrect was a per refresh spell, and there was no refreshes. It was actually called per game back then. So you had this many and healers could take up to 8. So healers could give out 8 resurrects per game, So that was their resurrects for the entire weekend.
That is something that I miss about V7 was that you had to be strategic with your lives, where now V8 is much more balanced and is much like I like the rock, paper, scissors of certain classes in V8, but I miss the strategic element behind how many lives is the action that I am about to do. Is that worth losing 25% of my total lives for this game?
Yes.
And in V8, your death doesn't matter. It really doesn't. And so I feel like there's got to be a way to meld those two things, but I'm not quite sure how to do it.
Kind of do what D&D did when they melded like all the best parts from the editions. And I do think that death mattering is a thing that I would like the V9 team to consider, really, is make it so death matters again. Now, it does say in the rules that's often unfortunately ignored by game designers that in the game that you design, death should be the worst thing that happens to you. You should be rare. It should be rarely worth it to take a death out of a crowd control effect.
And it's just not, if I get iceballed in every other game except a capped Bridge Wars where I have like 100 lives for my team, in any normal battle game, I'm just taking the death rather than sitting there through the ice ball.
And honestly, people don't realize this, but that makes spells like Ice Ball like ridiculously powerful. Not even if without that little effect, Ice Ball's still one of the most powerful spells. But now it's an engulfing death ball. If getting Ice Balled is worse than death, then now suddenly Ice Ball is like one of the most powerful things ever. Yeah.
Well, and why in a game where you don't have death counters and they are mainly objective-based games, which is what most of V8 is, what incentive do you have to sit there and take the full CC?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, just go die and come back.
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't have enchantments, I guess that's the only thing. You don't want to lose your enchantments, maybe.
Don't want to use enchantments. You might have like a healer or a bard on your team who has releases and stuff like that and can free you from that stuff. But other than that, you're right. Luckily, the parks that I play at, I heavily encourage you to have the death count be 60. And a lot of times those same parks will have the death count at 60, and they'll do half count for every verbal and spell ball. So verbals are 15 and spell balls are 30. So that might be something like built like. I think that if I were to give advice to the V9 team, like have a death count and stuff like that be built in, but with an advisory that you can overwrite this. Yeah.
The downside I have found, at least on like the local level, if I'm playing a 6-person game or an 8-person game, a healer or a wizard with spell balls can very easily, ice ball. We have to cap this point for 30 seconds. We just won.
Yeah.
So like, I feel like those things, what you're saying there makes sense on a kingdom level and on a competitive level, but on a local shire level, it's hard. It's so hard.
Definitely.
And I'm glad I am not on the team that has to figure out how to balance a game for 8 players and 8 players. Like that is so hard. Mad respect to those people.
Oh, absolutely. One thing that I would love to have happen is less verbals on the field. That's one other weakness I would say on V8 is that every class has verbals.
If we got rid of all offensive verbals, I would be so happy. I think that as far as like getting new people into the game, if we compare the competitors, Dag, Bell, SCA, I can grab when I play Dagger here, I can grab a new player, never played any game before, and in 5 minutes give them a rundown and they can go play Dag and have fun for 4 hours. We had 2 new players out at our park yesterday, and we were trying to explain a battle game to them, and it took me 15 minutes just to run through a level 1 wizard spell list with this guy.
Yeah.
And then we get out there and he's wide-eyed and he has no clue what's going on because everyone's shouting and screaming at him. And it's part of the game. And if once you figure it out, it's got some fun stuff to it. But as far as new player onboarding, even our level 1 stuff is way too complicated.
It also depends on the player. Like some people are really into that. Like, oh, I like it. They like soak up this complexity and stuff like that. And they, like the day one players who want to play wizard. That's pretty awesome. I think that verbals are a huge part of the game. I don't think they're going to be going anywhere. I think that there would be a lot of pushback to removing them. But I think there's some compromise. Like in V7. Verbals did exist, but pretty much only casters had them. I think that's a good compromise. Instead of having every class with verbals, give the fighting classes, and the fighting classes are supposed to be the active classes. Mm-hmm. Don't give assassin hold person. Give them an entangle. And you can even call it Ebola or something like that if you want some flavor. But instead of giving warriors insult, give them a special javelin or something like that. Give the fighting classes actively usable stuff, which is better, which scales a lot better than verbals do. Then leave verbals to the caster. That cuts the amount of verbals available by probably 3/4, because you still get mostly fighting classes because caster classes are complicated. Like they only appeal to a certain subset of people.
Well, I think anything we can do to bring the number of verbals down will help the game, because especially if you got to keep, man, and you're fighting, unless you're someone like yourself who has multiple paragons and understands the interactions between everything. Like I've been playing for 10 years, 11 years at this point, and I get out on a keep field and I still have no clue what's going on half the time. And so alone for a new player, when you get that many people screaming that many things, it's just hard to keep track of.
Oh, absolutely. And this is coming from someone who has 4 paragons, and in a keep battle, I basically have to add 20 syllables to every spell to let them know that I got something off on them, because I have to, shout it. Like the keep that had some players are gracious, the keep that Polaris had, its pole arms.
It's infamous pole arms.
Yeah, that was the 2017 keep, and I actually helped autocrat that keep. But we had a rule as the autocrats and the warcrat and everything that everyone on the main staff could participate in one game. So I played in one game, and I was on the other end of the field. This is before I joined Polaris, of the pole arms, and I remember Megiddo had one of the pole arms, and I kept targeting it, and he didn't know what I was casting, but he assumed pretty much everything. Like, okay, my pole arm needs a mend and a release because he might have heated it or he might have destroyed it. Because in that particular game, I played as a wizard and I took 15 heat weapons because I'm like, oh, they have pole arms. Well, but even then, it was hard for me to be effective on the field just because there was so much chaos and I had to scream my heat weapons in order to be heard. So verbals on a very large field just kind of lose their effectiveness, and you have to rely on spell balls, which makes things like large polearm strats to being amazing.
For sure. So I've got a question for you that I think you were probably uniquely equipped to answer, because most of the time when I talk to people with Paragon ships, they are hyper focused on their specific thing, and they are very good at that specific thing. But you having 4 of them, my question to you is, were any of those significantly easier or harder to obtain than the others? If this idea, right, with the whole 5th belt and the Paragons thing, is there one that people should be gunning for as easier than the others? And if so, why, and how would you fix that?
So my easiest Paragon was Paragon Paladin. I had a lot of people. I had a lot of people recommend me for that. When pretty much as soon as I became a knight and was eligible to play it, because the first time I played it, it was we were an every man for himself battle game, and I almost won it. It was a tie. The last people alive actually were me and Alicia, and we killed each other. But we were all level 6, and I was immediately recommended for it because the healer, who was Varus, immediately started casting something on me, and I knew I was immune to that. I had been studying Paladin, wanting to play it and all that stuff. And Paladins, this was in V7, were immune to subdual and death. So, and those are the only spells that you can cast while moving. So if anyone points at you and starts casting a spell while moving while you're playing Paladin, you're just like, yeah, no. So I ran him down and killed him. And then Navrin was like, I didn't know Paladins were immune to that. Yeah, he should get a Paragon right now. So people were recommending me for a while. And I was making another thing that Paladins got in V7 is they had unlimited, where if you touch somebody and you said, my face shall defend thee, while you were touching them, they were immune to everything you were immune to. It was transfer immunities.
Interesting.
And that was unlimited. So I would make diving saves to save people from Finger of Death. So if someone would be targeted with an extension Finger of Death, I would run up, dive, touch them on the leg, my faith shall defend thee, and guess what? That person's now recommending me for Paragon Paladin, especially since I'm in armor. So, but every other Paragon that I had the unique problem of, and over and over, my Paragon Druid, my Paragon Wizard, my Paragon Healer. People thought I was already a Paragon Healer and Druid and Wizard for years. Like every Monarch, someone would recommend me, and the Monarch would say, Kaads is already a Paragon Druid Healer Wizard or something like that. So, yeah, that was the biggest problem, and it took years to earn all of those Paragons because of that. So easiest one was Paragon Paladin. And people knew I wasn't a Paragon because I had just gotten knighted the year before. But all the other ones, they took a very long time to learn.
I got
earn. You. It took a lot of vying for it and a lot of hardcore playing it.
So I guess my next question then off of that is, do you feel any of the Paragon ships are easier or harder to obtain? And then is that a problem? Should they all be equal, or does it matter if some are easier than others?
I've heard some things on that note. I've heard Paragon Archer can be hard to earn, but I've also heard
I don't know any Paragon Archers.
Yeah. But I've also heard it can be easy to earn because all you have to do is be known for shooting really well. Like, and it's kind of a thing where, like, we want to give, Hogman, Dyer Barker, a Paragon Archer because he plays Archer. Because he's known for shooting really, really well and really, really fast. So I think, that's my experience. But then again, getting to that skill isn't very easy, I feel that if you're an archer who really knows their class and really knows their specialty arrows and uses their specialty arrows well, you are going to still have a hard time getting Paragon Archer over someone who doesn't play Archer but has a high rate of fire and is really accurate and is known for being those things, So that's kind of the weird thing about Archer. And in the meantime, Hogman finds it hard to get his Paragon Druid, even though that's what he plays. And because
he doesn't play a normal Druid. Like, it's hard. I feel in that in particular, it is when Druid is, in my opinion, head and shoulders the best class in the game. And to get someone who isn't playing the meta in that class for him, it's going to be very hard because he's the only Druid that I know of. So I feel like it's hard for him.
And that's like sad to me. Like that kind of segues into the second part of your question of like, should it be hard or harder? And it's like, in my opinion, take someone who does pretty well as a druid with like the cookie cutter build that everyone uses. Like I could build the cookie cutter build and I could do well with it. But then you have Hawkman who took something that nobody, else is doing and ran with it. That's his style of druid. That's his druid. And he mastered it. That's more Paragon worthy in my eyes.
I agree.
Because he is, he's doing something different than everybody else is. He took his own thing and mastered it and is kicking ass with it. That is more Paragon worthy.
And depending on the Paragon too, there's some on the Druid. There's some Druids when I see on the other team, it's like, okay, I know they're going to be candy. That's annoying, but okay, I know they're going to golem him and going to go. Okay, I actually have to worry about that one. Man, when Hogman's on the other team, I'm like, crap. All right, how do I plan for this? And that, for me, that's what I want to see out of my Paragons is when they are on the other team, I have to specifically plan around them, and he does that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like he's the only one who I will look like if I'm playing Wizard usually. I'm playing like a suicidal wizard sort of a thing. I don't take any enchantments. I like to teleport in the midst of the enemy team and all that stuff, and basically be able and willing to die, but take people out with me. Because I'm a master of offense. I'm willing to bet that I can take 5 people out with me, and then and 5 good players out with me if I die. Not when Hogman's on the field, because he'll just shoot me with an arrow before I even start to ramp up with that. So Hogman is one of the only people who I will take, some sort of pro proj or magic armor for, and then play a more conservative wizard. So he kind of changes the game doing that.
So what's your opinion on? I have heard, and maybe you can agree or disagree on this, that the melee paragons are easier to obtain. Just because if you get a warlord who's playing monk, they're obviously going to shine at being a monk. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're good at monk. They're just good at fighting. So what's your take on that?
I think there's some merit in that, especially if you're like a Paragon level. Like Raven is going to find it to be a lot easier to earn a Paragon in the fighting classes than someone who, it's kind of a very similar thing to Archer. Like I said, like you could master the abilities, know when to use pinning arrow, know when to use poison arrow, know when, have some really good moments on using phase arrow. But if you don't have like the rate of fire and the accuracy of Hogman, you're going to have a hard time for someone who does. And that, like I said, there's some merit in that. I'd be hesitant to give someone a Paragon Warrior just for fighting well if they don't even own armor, because that's kind of the thing. Like
that's a part of it.
Yeah, it's a big part of it. It would be like if someone played Archer. Like imagine if a stick jock who played Archer and just ran around killing people with a sword. Would you give them Paragon Archer?
No, but I'd love to see it.
I'd love to see it. Yeah. But Monk is kind of different because all you have to know is that you're immune to the spells and everything like that. Monk is one of the best. If you're really super athletic and a decent fighter, you don't actually have to be that decent of a fighter. You can just be a super athletic guy like Zave. And don't get me wrong, Zave's a really good fighter, but he is just athletic as hell.
He'll run for days. And he fighting on a Phoenix, fighting against him on a Phoenix League team. It was just hell because he would just, he would be across the field and then you'd look away and he'd score, because he just grabbed that ball and, because he was just quick as hell. Like I've never seen anything like that before. So athleticism helps, knowing how to fight when playing a fighting class helps. So there might be some merit in that. But you could also go the other way that if you don't know how to fight, it's that much harder to be, I've heard people say that caster classes are the easiest to Paragon because of that. You don't have to be good at fighting, and being good at fighting is a huge, I've seen in the casters too, though, there is a higher likelihood that your garb will push you up and over, your role play will push you up and over. I don't see that as, I guess, in everything other than assassin. I have seen some assassins who they wear all black and kill someone off the field. Let's give them. But I feel like on the casters, if you look like a wizard, that's going to do more for you than if you look like a barbarian.
I always say that it's the 3 S's when it comes to what determines a Paragon. In order of importance, number 1 is just skill. Like, how good are you at the class? It's the most important, in my opinion, sort of. The second one is equally important, if not more. But in that schooling, how do you teach other people? And the only reason I put that as number 2 and not number 1 is if don't have the skill, how are you going to teach? You need number 1 to get to number 2, even though I would look at how much, once they have number 1, it's a kind of a combination of factors in the Paragon hood, but they need 1, but I would really look at 2. Number 3 is style. And that's what you just said. How do you portray the class? How do you role play the class? That sort of a thing.
Cool. So you mentioned it earlier, and this is one of the ones I wanted to talk to you about. Phoenix League, Phoenix Ball. That is something from the very beginning, from the get-go, you have jumped on board, have traveled all over, and had played. Tell me, what do you enjoy about Phoenix League? What is the most fun for you? Why did you get so involved in this game?
So it's just something that me and my friends, like, especially like me and Averin, Smurf, all the people who are on Phoenix League, we've been playing competitively for a while. So finally there was this one thing, this thing that opened up, and we had a team planned for long before Phoenix League actually started in the Rising Winds. It was going to be an all FC team at first, but then we opened it up and said, like, you know what, we'll take a team that's just outside of our fighting company and everything like that. So it was just just a natural fit for us. It was something that we've wanted our entire Amtgard careers, but not really, because Bridge Wars existed and that was like a once a year thing. But now that there's this league that we could travel for, and we knew that the Midwest Amtgard had the best battle gamers. And people didn't there's people didn't actually get that. So,
people who doubted
didn't doubt us anymore. One of my favorite stories is the Fury one, where what we did, there was a Phoenix League tournament in Battlecry and a Phoenix League tournament at Pennsylvania in Golden Vale on the same weekend. And the one in Golden Vale was the national tournament, actually, that was being hosted by the creator of Phoenix League. And they had medals and they had like all this, stuff. And we kind of politicked it so that we said, told Battlecry, you should really have the Phoenix League tournament on Sunday, because the Fury was on Saturday. And what we did was we rented a passenger van in Indianapolis. We all met in Indianapolis. We rented a passenger van and we drove 18 hours to Pennsylvania. And we arrived there on Friday. We got some sleep. We fought in the Phoenix League tournament. We didn't get scored on, by the way, that weekend. We dominated the entire weekend. We beat, 5 teams, 10 to nothing. And then we stuck around for like the reward ceremony, but then we're like, we have to go. Peace. And we left and we drove to Ohio. Mana's husband, Kevin, drove most of the way so we could get some sleep. And then we played in Battlecry. And we won that's one of my favorite Amtgard stories.
Yeah, for sure.
So good.
For those who don't follow or subscribe, there's a WAC. It's called the WAC podcast, and great guys out of Winter's Edge. They interviewed Woonjo, who is the creator of Phoenix Ball, and he talked about this specific tournament and how Rising Winds came and just took it too seriously and just smoked everybody. And I smiled as a Rising Winder. I was pretty happy with that. So if you guys haven't watched that, go check out that podcast. They're great guys over there. It was a good episode.
Yeah, and I might be remembering it differently than anyone else there that day, but I remember us showing some pretty good sportsmanship. Like, we weren't getting in giant arguments with other teams. We had smiles on our faces throughout the entire day. Yeah. And people were actually, yeah, go ahead. I was going to say that people were giving us some pretty good compliments too. Like, there was one point where Anavrin was on the bench and he was sitting down smoking, and one of us died, which meant he could come in, and someone looked and saw Navrin, and he, without changing the expression on his face, took a drag of his cigarette, flicked it, got up, and just smoked the other team. And they called him, and he was, playing Paladin in full armor. Yeah. And so they called him, so he was given the nickname that day of the Juggernaut, because that's pretty much what happened.
Yeah, and I know I've gotten this a few times where when the FC team fought you guys in Phoenix League, when FC and we've met Eric Don in the finals of that Bridge Wars, and everyone expects there to be all of this big bad blood and everyone's screaming and yelling. Man, that was some of the most fun Amtgard I've had in a long time. And we're super competitive because we're all that way naturally. And then we have our friends on the other side, and our friends left. We want to beat them, but man, afterwards there were hugs all around. We were taking photos. I think that's something I love about the hyper competitiveness of the Rising Winds. If there wasn't that element, I wouldn't enjoy it. But because we can have, we are friends on the competitive teams, and even if you are going ham and you lose, it's still so much fun.
Oh, there was one time we fought the Double Crossers,
Which was
the FC.
was the FC team, yeah.
Yeah, which is the FC team. And yeah, we were screaming at each other. Like we were constantly accusing the other team of like, I hit you, no, blah, 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 blah. You're dead, and it was really bad. Like the Reeves were really close to stopping it. And then as soon as the match ended, we all hugged each other and we all went out for Chinese. And you could just see that transition of people shouting and screaming at each other. And then like 2 hours later, us all just laughing, eating and having a jolly time at a Chinese restaurant. It was great.
I remember that one in particular because you guys, they Stack Deck beat Double Crossers, and
Mm-hmm.
we were played, and we just got to the point where we were scoring, but it was obvious we weren't going to win anymore. But like
Mm-hmm.
we were competing, still having fun,
Mm-hmm.
and Tugin had smoked Randy Bane. And
Uh-huh.
was like trash talking hard from it. I think he double legged him and was like just trashing hard. And then the next round, I picked the ball up and ran it in and scored it on Tugin. And then just to hear Randy from the side like, "Oh, he dunked it on you. Where you at, dude?" Like, and it's just it's such a fun game, especially when you get competitive and everyone keeps their cool.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes it so much more fun for everybody.
Yeah. Definitely.
I love Phoenix League. I hope it comes back after COVID.
Me too. I know that they had a hard time getting it going during Keep, so it might not be a thing for Keep anymore. Like the very last Keep that we had it, what happened was Manama had 7 teams signed up, and then 4 of them bailed. But that was like the story of that Keep. I had like major, wing runners bailing for my night quest and stuff like that. And everybody had people like who were going to go to Keep, but then didn't go to Keep. It was like, I think, so that was unfortunate for that particular Keep. And that's something that we also have to work on to restore as Keep, I think. So.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where the numbers fall this year for Keep because it's coming off of COVID, so I expect a decline anyway. Mm-hmm. It's at a new location, which I would expect a decline anyway. So I still think Keep will be hundreds of people, but I'm interested to see how many hundreds, if that makes sense.
And I've heard the argument that we probably shouldn't have had it this year so we can spend the time hyping it up for next year. And that's a valid argument, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Keep has been by far my favorite event outside of Bridge Wars. There is something about seeing all of my friends who travel in from all over the game, and I don't get that anywhere else other than potentially Gathering, but I haven't been to that. I've heard that has a lot of people at it, but
and there's a lot of potential for Keep. Like, so currently the next site that we're going to, I both like and don't like. I don't like it because it doesn't have a lot of varied terrain. I think that varied terrain is a huge part of any Keep, because Keep is supposed to be the event that focuses on the games. Like the goal of Keep is to get 600 people on the field and engage at all times. And that's what made Wolf Creek Stake part so perfect for that is because we had trails, we had, a wooded area, we had a lightly wooded area, we had clearings, that we could have games. You could have a node capture game all throughout the woods, which we've had before, and it was run really well. There's so much you can do on a field, and you can have some pretty good games on a field. But there is some potential with the new Keep site because there are large indoor facilities. And the large indoor areas, I've been saying for a while, what we should do is instead of having a night quest, have a Friday quest that goes all day Friday, and it's run like Dungeon Day in Polaris. And I don't know if you're familiar or if you've ever been to a Dungeon Day.
I haven't been, but I've seen you and others hype it up a whole bunch.
Oh yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's basically take the Keep night quest and run it all day and have it so staggered teams go in, which is kind of one of the weaknesses of night quests. And you can only do so much, because you only have probably 4 hours on a Friday to run, 23 teams through. So there's only so much you can do and not have insane lines, and the lines get pretty insane anyway. But you're not limited to that if you're doing it all day. There are other limits, like, the endurance of your questers and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. I remember my first keep, and it was something I will never forget. I had been to 1 or 2 RW events, and I thought RW events were big, and they are by most, by most kingdom standards. But then I show up on my first day of keep, and I walk on that field for the first time, and I see all those people.
Yeah.
There's nothing else like it.
Absolutely not.
And I hate the chaos, but man, is it fun to play it.
Yeah. I think that the last keep, the one that Cue Ball ran, was really, really fun. I highly enjoyed that one. He did some pretty good games. The keeps that I played at that I don't like so much, the ones that have like all those people on the field, but compacted into one small area, so then it's just chaos. In my opinion, the way to run a keep game, and the way I've found success for keep games, is you have the game in a very large area, and you have objectives all over the map. That way, it becomes kind of a big war game of where you're sending people. Like, fog of war is an issue there. Like, you don't know what's going on all the time unless your team is really good at communicating and has radios and stuff like that, which you very well might, So, yeah, that's one thing I really like about Keep, is when the games are really run well and you have a ton of people on the field, it's amazing.
My favorite game I've ever played at Keep was the Settlers of Catan game.
Oh,
that
yeah, I remember that one.
So fun because it has a mechanic that it gave an objective to the battle game other than just capture this point. All it was you capture this point game. But to know that I'm capturing that point, which is going to give resources to my guy who's playing the Catan game. And for those who weren't there, there were 3 teams. Each team, that picked a person who was playing the actual board game, and the resources that they got came every 5 minutes or whatever. The nodes were captured, and whichever team had those nodes, those resources went to the player. And then you won by the end of the Catan game.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
By actually playing Settlers of Catan. So, you would know that if you're like bringing all these resources to your guy, but your guy sucks at Settlers of Catan, you might still have a harder time.
But I liked it because there was an objective that I could fight for on the field that was easily visible, and it didn't feel meaningless or corny. Right? Yeah. Sometimes it's like, they're attacking your base. Go! Like, okay, cool. I'm just going to go hit people. I'm not invested in that objective. But that one I was, because I had to help my guy win that board game.
Yeah, exactly. You're the player on the field of that board game, that with an active fight going on over resources. Yeah. No, that's a pretty good one. Yeah, Ash ran that one. I think he did a really good job. Ash came up with like really cool creative stuff like that.
And I think it was that keep also where they did a battle game where there were big buckets of water in the woods, and you had to scoop the water and take it back to your base. I thought that was a super fun game mechanic too that I hadn't really seen. And after all the water from all the buckets was gone, whichever team had the most water in their base won.
Yeah, and that was, I believe the theme of that keep was Dark Sun, so that makes sense because water was scarce. You all lived in a desert, and it was like the post-apocalyptic survival type of a game. So, yeah.
Yeah, that one was fun. I like that keep a lot. It was hot, if I recall. It was very hot, and if I recall, was that the one that Ash got his Master Smith for, or did he have?
I think so. I think that was the one he got his Master Smith for.
Cool. Good for him. I had, as a player, I had a lot of fun with that one.
Yeah. I was Monarch for that keep, and I remember giving Ash his Walker in the middle.
For throwing Brennan off?
For throwing Brennan off the field, yes.
I remember, for those who don't know, Brennan walked up and was cheesing a game mechanic before the game, and he was cheating. And Ash just threw him off, and then Brennan threw a fit and pulled his whole team off. And it was great.
Brennan threw a fit. Apparently he walked up to Ash and was like, I could get the autocrat up here right now agreeing with me, and like you don't want to do this. And Ash wasn't intimidated by his bullying. So what did Brennan do? He brought in the autocrat. Who is the autocrat? Cue Ball. Cuball thought Brendan was a giant piece of shit too. So that didn't help Brendan's side. And Cuball's like, nope, I'm siding with my Warcrat. So, yep.
So he pulled his team off, and then everyone else on the field started singing that na 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 na. Hey, it was so good. I remember that. And again, I was a relatively new player at that point, and to see that, like, those games were fun, to see someone throwing a fit and the game runners actually standing up to them. Because before that, I had been to a Bridge Wars where I had seen a couple of less than great interactions with people yelling at Reeves, and the Reeves every single time backed down. And to see Ash not back down was pretty cool.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's a good pro tip. Is it might not be PC nowadays, but it used to be called a Reeve with sack. So that's heavily respected. A Reeve that'll take charge and not back down and stuff like that. Not allow themselves to be intimidated.
Not get pushed around by a loud voice or an angry player.
By a loud voice or a popular player. Like popular players who lose their temper every once in a while and yell at the Reeves. Like the Reeve is like, oh, I don't want to, throw that person off the field because, that person's popular. It'll ruin me. Like they'll politicize me. But, chances are if that player is angrily yelling at you, it's probably not the first time. And trust me, no matter how popular or untouchable that player is, people, you throwing them off the field might turn out more well than you think.
Yeah, and when everyone agrees with you, you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. People will be like, finally, someone is standing up to that player. Now, that player's company mates and friends won't like it, but, screw them.
That's all right sometimes. So, in COVID, earlier you said you've lost a significant amount of weight. Has there been anything in the last 6 months to 12 months that has been going on in Amtgard with you personally? That what has been exciting you? What have you been working on lately?
So right now, and I'm going to do a shout out to my shield maiden. Her name is Zaire Michaelis. She is pretty much the one person I've been working on as a mentor status, and she's been doing really well. She has a lot of energy, and she's been stepping up, and she's basically willing to, run events, autocrat, warcrat, whatever. And that's pretty much what I'm excited about doing now is, offering the mentor thing. Because I've, when I got to Polaris, I wanted to prove that I'm still a Master Smith. So I ran a MAME. And I wanted to prove that I'm still a Master Crown. So it's just why I'm running for Monarch. And most of my other time is getting spent on the mentor thing. And that's another thing I'm excited about. I am running for Monarch of the Kingdom Polaris.
That was going to be my next question is what are you excited about in the next 6 to 12 months of the game?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So in the past 6 months also, I NPC'd a online dungeon day where I got to play as a villainous AI who was trying to delete the players unless they solved the puzzle. And it was pretty cool because the puzzle they had to solve was very simple, but I was the one in control of the pieces and stuff like that and the thing. And they had to convince me to click on certain things and do stuff like that. And I was a very cynical AI who, this isn't going to work. No, why don't we try this answer instead, which is the wrong answer. And then I'd be like, nah, see, it didn't work. But it says it was solved. It said that was the right answer. That's a bug, So I got to play as I really got to get into role play and playing as a very cynical, because the virtual dungeon day was Tron themed. So that's why that's cool. Why I should have opened with that. That's why I was a very cynical AI.
Dude, this is Amtgard. You can throw whatever you want fantasy stuff out there, and it doesn't faze me anymore. It's like, yeah, you want to play? We're doing a Power Ranger ring.
Oh,
cool.
That might actually be coming up. Merrick, and by the way, I want to do a shout out to Merrick. He has been doing He's been doing Paragon related videos. He's been advertising him on the unofficial Amtgard group. He's been advertising on the players group, but he does podcasts, voice only, where Paragons sit down and talk about the class, and they usually run for 2 hours, 2 or 3 hours. And I've been told that people really like them. I've been on 4 of them because I have 4 Paragons. So
I'm pretty sure I watched the one with you and Imhog for Paladin.
Paladin, yeah. That I really liked that one. So
I should probably watch the healer one.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm on that one too. So that was exciting, and I've been doing that. Another thing that I've been excited for is just the players did virtual park days really, really well, where we played lots of Jackbox, made lots of T-shirts, stuff like that. And my shield maiden, technically woman at arms, that's something that's in the past and also the future, and I'm looking forward to helping with that, and we'll kind of transition to my king reign. What I plan to do is partner with the Come Try Larp thing with Hogman, and run that quest that Hogman has that he's found success with. Run that in several parks in Polaris with a theme of rebirth and everything like that. And
we actually ran one last week, and we ended up.
Nice.
Yep, we are a fairly new freehold, and so we ended up having, I want to say it was like 42 sign-ins for that day, and the local news crew came out. Like it was pretty fun, and I would say over half of those people had never picked up a sword before. Like we had some DAG players that came in, some other Amtgarders had come in and help us run it. But over half of them were brand new players. So for those listening out there, it's a proven thing. We've done it 3 times now at 3 different parks, and every time has seen the park numbers spike. Yeah,
so I want to run it in as many parks as possible. I'm hoping to have at least 3. Who knows? It might be successful, and we might have more. I mean, all you need is 2 weeks of prep time, and there's definitely some people. I guess the harder thing is the money, because a lot of parks might not have a budget, but there's a lot of people who might donate money themselves. Like I'm probably going to donate a little bit to help a park out if they really want to do it but don't have the money. But speaking of which, there are about 14 active parks in Polaris. And I plan to visit all of them. It's going to be a lot of plane tickets, but that's a big thing that I did when I was Monarch of the Rising Winds. Is there were like 26 parks, and I ended up visiting them all, which meant traveling every weekend.
Yeah.
But it's something I highly recommend Monarch does. You walk out of that reign a lot more knowledgeable about all the people in your kingdom, because you will meet people who like run games every week in different parks who are really, really talented, but you'd never know it because they don't go to events. I remember there was a park that I went to. It was North Haven. That is now a part of Polaris, and they ran Amtgard. They had an ongoing quest that was very much structured like a D&D game, where they would, they'd make the choice to go here, and then they would go through a little dungeon that the game master set up and fight monsters and stuff like that. So
that's cool.
And I wouldn't have known about that if I didn't travel. So if you're going to be a monarch of your kingdom, travel.
So Rising Winds now is something like 42 or 39 parks or something silly. So you couldn't even hit all of them if you wanted to. But for the normative size kingdoms in Amtgard, that's definitely a doable thing.
Also, I'm happy to hear that Tyrant's Thorn is doing well. And I love the name of that park, by the way.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think we're on week like 6 maybe. And
nice.
And so we're, like I said, relatively new. But we've got some vets that are there, and we had this past week was our first week after the Come Try Larp, and we had 12 sign-ins for that for a brand new park. So I'm pretty excited for it. It's been pretty fun.
It sounds like it, yeah. I'm happy for it.
Thanks. Something I've wanted to do for a long time. I've never created a park, and so that's part of it. And I've never, believe it or not, in 10 years of playing, I've never had a park in my hometown. I've always driven at least 30 to 45 minutes to go play, and so we're having a good time with it. So
nice.
Yeah. So I think with that one, we can go ahead and wrap it up. Viewers, thank you for joining us for this. Kaads is going to be back on for at least 1, maybe 2 more. We'll see how it goes.
So, and the next one, I want to hype the next one, because I think the next one, it's going to be tea time. because I am going to talk about that whole incident that where I dropped my belts and everything like that.
Okay. So
And I'll be happy to
everyone's
talk about
sitting here for an hour and a half waiting for you to talk about it, and then right at the end we'll say, "And next time."
Yep.
So if you guys like this content, please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. It does a lot to the channel. Really appreciate you guys watching. Do you have something else, sir?
Oh no, just that. I just wanted to hype that up. It will be tea time, and I will talk about it in detail.
Cool. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.